Laurel Canyon explores how a small section of Los Angeles, California became a hub of influential rock and folk music in the late 60s and early 70s, producing acts like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Love, Joni Mitchell, and the Eagles. Now it's in the hunt for recognition at this year's Emmys, and we are joined by the film's director, Alison Ellwood. I'm Charlie Bride of Gold Derby. And the first question I want to ask is, did you have a personal connection to these musicians when you were growing up?
Not so much when I was growing up. I initially was interested in the Laurel Canyon music scene when I was living in LA years ago. I wanted to make a film about the Doors. And when I started researching them, I realized they'd lived in the canyon, that there were so many other artists up there. And I said, oh, this would be such a fun story to tell. But, it was over 20 years ago. The music was owned by tons of different people. So it was really hard to do. So when it came back around just a few years ago, I was thrilled to be able to dive into it again.
Was there a different situation because the music is such a huge presence in the film, and it's something I didn't even think of in terms of how in terms of like the licensing that you would have to go through to get a lot of these songs. Did that aspect of it change? Did it become easier to?
It's never easy, so I should not ever say it's easy. My music supervisor would have my head. It's still very complicated and very expensive, but it's a little bit more consolidated. Some of the artists are now under single labels versus multiple labels and subsidiaries. So it was just too much of a quagmire 20-something years ago. So it's still complicated and hard to do, but we got really lucky, and our music supervisor did an amazing job clearing everything for us. So.
And one of the things that's very striking in the film is how you hear interviews with people, but you don't see them. You don't actually see them speaking to the camera about it. Rather, the vast majority of it is just the interview overlaid, played over archival footage and photographs from that era. And I'm curious how much of the audio that's used in the film was recorded specifically for it.
Probably 50-60%. We had a lot of archival audio interviews as well that we used, but we interviewed virtually everyone who's still living. We were able to get an original interview, but we did combine them with older interviews, because some of the older interviews, they were talking more in that time about relating to what they were going through in the canyon or with their music. So yeah, it's probably 50-60% our original interviews.
And one of the things I'd love to ask documentary filmmakers is obviously, when you're making something like this, very often you're not going to be able to fit everything in there that you want to. And I'm wondering, were there any stories that you wish you could have included in the final product, but for one reason or another, you just weren't able to?
I would have loved to have included Carole King and James Taylor, who were both part of that scene, at least for a while. But neither of them are very keen on doing interviews, first of all. And we had archival interviews of both of them, but neither of them ever spoke to the Laurel Canyon thing. So in the end, we just didn't have the time to wait for them to possibly agree to it. So we had to finish the film. But I was sad that we couldn't get them in.
It's hard to imagine that scene based on the acts that you show in the film. It's hard to imagine them being any more, prestigious, I want to say. But the addition of those two just seems like it would have been like almost unreal. Like you're making some of this up, right?
No, it's amazing how these artists were connected to one another, and that was one of the things that we discovered very organically in the process of making the films, that we would find these connections that were so wonderful. Because I was a little bit worried that it would feel like an anthology when you have so many different artists, but we were able to find connections that just make them flow into one another, I think, pretty organically, which was very exciting.
Did you learn anything new about some of these performers that truly surprised you, that you never would have expected to be true about some of these people?
I mean, I didn't know that Peter Tork was a nudist, and I didn't know that he was almost a monkey. I didn't know that Alice Cooper was in the Canyon scene, or that he had a connection to Zappa. Well, actually, I knew about the connection to Zappa through the label, but I didn't know that that he went to audition for Zappa at 7 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. That's a pretty good story. No, there's lots of little things I learned. I mean, I learned about the Love Doors connection. That was really interesting. How Love desperately wanted to get out of their contract, so they pushed Doors on Elektra and ended up kind of stabbing themselves in the foot.
I think that was one of those two, actually. The one with Alice Cooper showing up at 7 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. and the one Love trying to get out of their contract by giving them the Doors, and then still just being stuck in it.
Yeah.
I think those were the ones that made me laugh the hardest, other than Peter Tork being the nudist. So I'm to your knowledge, it's so interesting to see something that's about a specific place that has churned out so many interesting, influential and interesting artists. And I'm curious as to your knowledge, has there ever been a community since Laurel Canyon that has produced either artists or musical acts on the same level?
I mean, the same level is hard to answer because there were so many of them in Laurel Canyon. But, certainly the grunge scene in Seattle produced a lot of great music and artists. Nashville continues to produce amazing artists. So I think these communities of like-minded artists do pop up from time to time, but this one in Laurel Canyon just happened to be so special and happened to define a time in our lives that I think, those people who either lived through it or didn't live through it have something associated with that time, so it just feels special.
So I was curious about something else when it comes to your career. Before you were directing documentaries, you were working as an editor on a lot of them. And I'm curious, we've seen some editors, go from being editors to directors. And I'm curious, how much of a leap was it from being an editor to actually directing films?
I thought it was a very natural progression for me. I'd been producing and editing too, so I'd been in the field quite a bit at various projects. So it just was a very natural transition, I think. And I work well with editors because I understand how editors work and how they think. So that's been really great. But sometimes, it's hard to take, the editing hat off and put the directing hat on.
One of the things is, so I also want to ask you about a previous movie of yours that's actually one of my favorites, and it's American Jihad. I found that such a fascinating film. Could you just let me know, what was it like making that movie and getting to explore this very, very delicate subject matter of a foreign terrorist organization targeting American citizens in terms of recruitment? And I was just wondering if you could just give me some insight about what it was like making that movie.
I mean, it was very intense, obviously. And talking to some of these folks who had gone down that road and realized the mistakes that they had made. But to me, that it was coming from inside. I mean, Anwar al-Awlaki was American born and American raised. He was, for all intents and purposes, American, but he got swept up into this whole ideology that so many young people find attractive because they feel lost somehow. It was sort of the Lost Boys kind of approach to it, I think, that, find their humanity, because people don't start life wanting to be terrorists and kill people. I'm quite convinced of that. And what switches? And that's sort of what we were trying to investigate in that.
So, we've talked about, some of your past projects. Also curious, what are some of the projects that you are currently working on for the future?
Well, I have some stuff in development at the moment, but nothing's completely greenlit. I do have a film that I directed about the Go-Go's that's being released on Showtime on August 1st. So we premiered at Sundance this last year. So that's exciting. And then, you know, have some projects in the works, but nothing in production yet. Obviously, COVID has had quite an interruption in production schedules at the moment. So.
And you actually were nominated for an Emmy as part of the team from the one of the first reality shows that we had in the modern reality wave, American High, which depicted, I believe it was at Illinois, an Illinois high school.
Yeah, Chicago.
What was that experience like for you? You know, getting that nomination, and getting to be a part of that whole thing.
Oh, that's an amazing series. To this day, it's still one of the very favorite projects I've worked on. Excuse me. I mean, the kids were so wonderful. We got to know them over the course of a year. You spend that much time. And I wasn't in the field a lot with them. I got to know them sort of toward the end in the editing process. But it's just a wonderful, wonderful show. And that show, I always think Survivor kind of killed us. We didn't get the premiere that we'd hoped for because we premiered the same week as Survivor. I'm not a fan of reality television, but I think that was sort of a documentary series, I think.
Better, that is a much better term for it. That is a much better term.
Yeah, it got lumped in with that title, which I don't think belongs to it.
Well, Alison, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best this Emmy season. And to all of our viewers, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to get all our latest content. And don't forget to go to goldderby.com and use the Gold Derby app to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the smartest prognosticators in Hollywood. Thanks so much, Alison.
Thank you. Take care. Be safe.